Whether we like it or not, we are in a time of big history once again, with all the instability and uncertainty that comes with it. And that became incontrovertible yesterday as Israel basically declared war on Iran. Exactly the sort of time you want cool and experienced heads in the White House, you might say. But, you know. The thing is, the United States tried to stay out of this war. For various reasons, some historical and some missteps by Trump in the last 24 hours, it seems now highly unlikely to be able to do so. So we should probably discuss. As you undoubtedly know, Israel launched dozens of airstrikes against Iran, hitting multiple targets, but particularly targeted on degrading Iran's nuclear program, taking out its top military leadership, and hitting a number of military facilities. So, for instance, the main command headquarters of the Revolutionary Guards was hit, and the Guards' leadership was killed in the process. Also, several nuclear scientists who had been working on Iran's nuclear program, they were killed. And in a sign that the attacks are intended to continue for some time yet, and we'll talk about that in a moment, the IDF also said that it had carried out a major strike on Iran's air defences. Now, we kind of knew this was coming, not least because the United States clearly did have advance notice and had actively started pulling its people out of embassies and bases that might be exposed in the potential backlash. And the fact is that the Trump administration said that they did not want this to happen. It had been, after all, carrying out negotiations with the Iranian leadership in an attempt to strike a deal to end Iran's ambitions to develop its own nuclear weapons. Whatever may have been the truth, because recent international negotiations led by Trump's golfing buddy and real estate developer Steve Witkoff, they haven't always been of the caliber that we used to. Trump said just yesterday, however, that they were, quote, fairly close to a pretty good agreement. And he said that he did not want Israel to attack Iran because it could blow the chances of that deal getting over the line. Well, President Trump may have formally been under the impression that if he's president, then war simply can't break out, but it turns out the real world just not following the script. Now, the rationale for Israel is thought to go something like this, and you can accept or reject the logic of it, of course, down to your preference. Israel had an existential wake-up call on October 7th, 2023, while much of the immediate language in the aftermath of the atrocities that had been committed against them by Hamas was about them hitting back at Hamas and getting back the hostages they were holding. Really, it went a lot further than that. Writing for the Foreign Policy website, Stephen Cook noted that Benjamin Netanyahu had specifically said that Israel would, quote, change the Middle East. They had concluded, he said, that it was untenable to simply keep going surrounded by Iran's proxies, all of whom were seeking in any and every opportunity to strike against them, and indeed to have Iran supplying them and organising them. So they'd ignored the voices from the West calling for restraint. They'd hit Gaza hard to render Hamas incapable of offering up a threat, regardless of the casualties amongst civilians that were involved. They had hit Iran's most powerful proxy, Hezbollah in Lebanon, decapitating the leadership, taking out many of its most active operatives. And then last October, they laid the ground for this step by hitting Iran's air defences and missile production facilities. From all of that activity, Iran was left in a seriously weakened state. Its proxies were in considerable disarray, a situation that had been thought impossible to achieve only as long ago as a year, at least not without major damage to Israel itself. So Trump may have thought that this favoured Iran making a deal with his eager team of rank amateurs because they should be more desperate for a deal. But guess what? I guess the Israeli government, and Benjamin Netanyahu in particular, felt that the opportunity existed right now, but the window wouldn't be open for long, for them to deal a decisive blow against their enemy. the head of the octopus, as they refer to it, the brains behind all the proxies, all the agents that have been seeking Israel's demise. They see the opportunity not just to wipe out Iran's short-term ability to produce nuclear weapons, but to de facto push them to breaking point, to get regime change for a much longer-lasting regional realignment. And weirdly, they preferred to take action with their own agency rather than to wait around and see what Steve Witkoff might come up with. For all that Israel was delighted when Trump put forward his absurd Gaza Riviera idea, they were delighted because it included the assumption the existing population would be relocated out of Gaza. The surreal nonsensical part, with Trump himself circulating what had been intended as a parody AI mock-up of the idea. All that probably did was to reinforce in their mind that a useful idiot was in the White House. Useful? They added the removal of civilians from Gaza into their game plan, but an idiot nonetheless. Now the United States is left pondering whether it can stay out of the war that is going to follow. Iran is seriously weakened, but this is their own existential moment, at least it is for the regime. So they will fight back, they will seek to engage, they will retaliate. It could be that they will have been revealed to be much more of a paper tiger than everyone thought. Their options for fighting back are certainly massively shorter to the task than they used to be. But we're going to find out. And while the United States, via Marco Rubio, initially made it very clear that they were not involved in any way whatsoever with the strike, and hence pretty please don't target our bases in the region when you retaliate, Iran has professed itself not to be persuaded. And if they had had the slightest temptation to be persuaded, and again I doubt that they did, but if they had, then President Trump solidly threw that away when he pitched onto social media with tough guy talk, presumably trying to see some of the initiative back. He said this: "I gave Iran chance after chance to make a deal. I told them in the strongest of words to just do it. But no matter how hard they tried, no matter how close they got, they just couldn't get it done." How do we think that sounds to Iranian ears? But there was more. "I told them it would be much worse than anything they know, anticipated, or were told. That the United States makes the best and most lethal military equipment anywhere in the world by far, and that Israel has a lot of it, with much more to come, and they know how to use it." Trump, of course, has refused to sell. Not to give, but to sell various weapons to Ukraine. And some of the weapons that the US did give to Ukraine before Trump put a stop to it were given with restrictions on how and where they could be used. So any adversary being targeted by Israel with all of those US weapons is going to conclude that it's basically being done as a partnership with the Trump administration, where it's at least approving and probably directly supporting the action. Trump carried on, and not making it better at any point. Certain Iranian hardliners spoke bravely, but they didn't know what was about to happen. They are all dead now, and it will only get worse. He then goes on to argue that as a result of all this, Iran must make the deal with America before there is nothing left, directly using the attacks as leverage to force them to agree to terms. Does that sound like a country that's not involved with the attacks, not intending to be involved with the war? So it's highly likely we'll see Iranian responses targeting American bases and military, not just Israeli, and then Trump has to decide. Does he fail to respond to those attacks and look weak, or does he allow himself to get pulled into a shooting war in the Middle East? His MAGA base are watching this very closely, because many of them strongly believed in the administration's rhetoric of keeping America out of foreign wars. A number of the MAGA leaders have been imploring Trump to stop Israel from doing this, but of course he couldn't, a failure he won't be quick to admit to. The Breaking Point host Saga Ingetti was typical of the common theme. He wrote this on Twitter. Israel has now made a mockery of the United States. President Trump today has said he did not want strikes ahead of negotiations scheduled for tomorrow, and they did it anyways. Their attack today is deliberate sabotage and a blatant attempt to force us into war. We must resist. Once the strike had begun, top Trump supporter Charlie Kirk said that while he was very pro-Israel, he knew that his audience, quote, are not thrilled with this situation at all. He, quote, tweeted one from Jack Posobiec that said that a strike against Iran would disastrously split the Trump coalition, adding his own thoughts, quote, no issue currently divides the right as much as foreign policy. I'm very concerned, based on everything I've seen in the grassroots in the last few months, that this will cause a massive schism in MAGA and potentially disrupt our momentum and our insanely successful presidency. Ironically, one of the things MAGA commentators were sharing on social media before the attack began was this 2011 video clip of then citizen Donald Trump slating then President Obama, saying our president will start a war with Iran, basically because he has no ability to negotiate. Ouch! Live by the MAGA tweet, die by the MAGA tweet. After some hours of this sort of messaging, Trump seemed to hear the echoes. He posted, we remain committed to a diplomatic resolution to the Iran nuclear issue. My entire administration has been directed to negotiate with Iran. Well, screw that, said Benjamin Netanyahu, and within hours the attack had begun. And now the brutal logic drawing the US into direct engagement with the war has just become a lot more powerful. Indeed, without some US involvement, it might be questionable whether Israel can fend off an Iranian strike should they retain the ability to deliver one of greater power than the initial posse of drones they sent in the immediate aftermath. The point is that Trump has had, I guess you'd call it, a honeymoon of sorts. Not the sort of honeymoon you'd want with your life partner, where he has been able to force the pace on all issues he dealt with to provoke everyone else to respond to him. It's how he's comfortable operating. Even though he's found with Russia and Ukraine, it doesn't actually bring warring parties to heel in the way that he imagined that it would. But now he's caught right on the nearest edge of the vortex for a powerful, lethal, explosive conflict situation where he is not the prime mover of events. His ability to walk away is constrained. I mean, will the US really abandon Israel after all the investment in their support? But if it doesn't, will he really outrage and scandalise his closest supporters by getting involved in someone else's war after all he promised? And as he gets ready to strut in front of his full military birthday parade tomorrow, this is an inescapable downer on his big ego moment. The forecasters have said the weather may not be great for the big show in DC, but events in the Middle East are likely to be raining on his parade in a far more substantial way than even the odd thunderstorm could manage. Because tomorrow is supposed to be the big man with the biggest army in the world on display for all to see. But he wants that big army to be, utilised bullying protesters in Los Angeles, not fighting for real in actual wars in the Middle East or anywhere else come to that. But this is his challenge, because what use is an authoritarian with a big army if he's actually scared to use it when the fight might be more lethal and more substantive? I mean, don't get me wrong, it is a saving grace for the United States at this point in its history that it has a frightened poser rather than a ruthless militaristic dictator. But the brutal exposure of that fact to the world means that the feeling that Trump currently has of being out of control of events, a non-player character even, that's something he's going to be experiencing a great deal more in the future.